The following is a presentation of the University of St. Thomas with campuses in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota.
Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with the Director of Veterans Services at the University of St. Thomas, Norman Ferguson. Norman will be presenting his Green Zone training, which will take about 45 minutes, and he'll have 15 minutes or so at the end of the presentation for Q&A. If you have a question for Norman over the course of the presentation, please use either the chat function or the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get those out to him to answer for you. With that, Norman, take it away.
All right. Thank you so much for allowing me to come and visit with you today. You're not here, but you're there, and I just appreciate you allowing me to be here. I am Norman. I'm the new Director of Veterans Services. I say new because I haven't quite been here a year. I think it'll be a year tomorrow. So I'm still technically new. And our Veterans Resource Center was opened last year on Veterans Day. So we're excited about our one-year anniversary for the Veterans Center coming up. But today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about student veterans, what they may experience when coming to school. And so usually it's geared to whatever institution I am at, but we're going to have it a little bit more general. So I hope we can all follow along, kind of understand what's happening, what's going on, and we'll try to proceed from there, if that's okay. So a couple of things we need to know about Green Zone training is what we're going to do today is kind of identify key aspects of military culture, what they may experience while they're in, talk about the student veteran themselves, discover the issues that they may face while in and out, and how that transition back to civilian life, specifically school, will affect them, and questions and comments that student veterans may find offensive. Let's talk a little bit about a Green Zone advocate. When we talk about a Green Zone is basically a safe zone. It's a safe space for student veterans to go, to feel like they're understood, if you will, a place where they can talk. And anyone who identifies himself as an advocate, as someone who has gone through the training, who cares. I heard a coach once say, there are two types of people, those who are committed and those who are interested. And you're there. I don't think you're forced to be there to watch this webinar, so it shows me and it shows all of us that you're committed to supporting our student veterans. You don't have to be an expert. None of us, I don't know, some of us are experts, some of us not, but I think for this particular point of view is that you care, that you listen, and that you're there for them. But first, how do we view veterans? I'm a big Calvin and Hobbes fan, if you haven't figured that out yet. I have my own Hobbes at home. He's a 15-pound blue Russian, and he is loud. Very loud, and he wakes me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, not to eat, but, you know, just to hang out. Hey, Dad, what's up? I'm like, I'm going to have to lock you out, I'm sorry. But he's a sweet guy. I chase rabbits, I will come back to it, please, just hang on, we'll get there. But how do we view veterans? A lot of times, unfortunately, it's the media that kind of forms our perception of veterans. And usually things like Ptsd, were they angry? And those are things we're going to kind of talk about today during this training. But I will tell you my own personal story, my own personal effect of the first veteran I ever knew, and that was my father. Now, when it comes to our perceptions and the way we know about people, there's a truth and then there's a myth. And especially a lot of times with military people, there's a truth about military people and a myth. And so that's kind of what I had with my father. But there were things that I did know were true. Number one, my father was a Marine. Now, if you know anything about Marines, Marines are very sensitive about being Marines. But we're all very proud of them. We are so happy they're on our side, right? But my father was a Marine. And so the Marines are a special group of a military force. And so they're kind of held up, and, you know, they're the smallest, but they're the most proud and, you know, and very strong. And so he was a Marine, and that was something that existed in truth. Second, he was in World War II, the greatest generation, right? And so now that truth is, there's one more level up of how high he's being esteemed. And three, he was at Iwo Jima. And so we all kind of have an idea of what Iwo Jima is and what that's like. And so that was what I knew about my father. And those three things are really, really hard to hold up to. But that's who he was. And that was my first expression of a veteran. That was the truth. But then the myth starts to happen. So the first myth, or the first thing I heard that didn't quite have truth to it, was the fact that he stepped over someone that he thought was deceased. And he woke up 3 days later on a hospital barge. When he stepped over the individual, a grenade blew up. And so he was sent to a hospital barge. But I never saw any proof of that. Second, he was supposed to receive a Purple Heart, but they accidentally gave it to the guy in the bed next to him. That's the second thing. It's like, I don't know if they would really mess up a Purple Heart like that, but that's what it was. And then the third one, well, my father was a construction worker, and he worked outside a lot. And every once in a while, he would pick something out of his leg, and it was a piece of grenade shrapnel that had made its way out, because we know the body tries to get rid of foreign substances. Never saw it, never heard about it, but people talked about it, right? And then there was the fourth myth, or the fourth thing that didn't quite have any substance to it, was the fact that he could never have an MRI because they said he had a piece of grenade shrapnel stuck in his skull. They didn't know what the magnet would do. It's those things that we hear. We have the truth about my father and these things I hear about, but never, ever got the proof behind it. And it wasn't until one day I touched his forehead and there was the grenade shrapnel right there. And so there are things that we know and understand and things that we think about, and go back to what we talked about. How do we view veterans? And we're going to talk about that a little bit more further as we go along. But let's talk about a veteran. Sometimes we hear it's a person who served in armed forces. Or I like this one, an old soldier who has seen long service. This one, a little bit more romantic, but not necessarily, not that it's not true, is someone who at one point in his or her life wrote a blank check made payable to the United States of America for an amount of up to and including my life. And we know that's true. But in actuality, there's no standardized legal definition of military veteran in the United States. A lot of it depends on what benefits you're eligible for. So for example, I used to work with the Department of Labor in the state of Georgia. And my counterpart worked with veterans as well. And one day we had heard about an individual who was claiming to be a Vietnam veteran and to kind of help his business that he was just starting. So we did a little investigation. And it turns out he was in the military during Vietnam, but he wasn't in Vietnam. So now you're talking about a Vietnam-era vet. So you have a Vietnam vet and a Vietnam-era vet. Why is that important? Because the benefits can be really, really completely different. And so a lot of times what type of veteran you are depends on what benefits you're eligible for. Now, there are 5 branches of service. Army, the most important. Well, that's because I was in the Army. It's a joke, it's a joke, it's a joke. But it includes the Army Reserve and National Guard, and we refer to them as soldiers. Marines include Marine Reserve, and please call them a Marine. Don't call them anything else but a Marine. Navy includes Navy Reserve, and they're usually called sailors. Air Force includes Air Force Reserve and Air Guard, and they are referred to as airmen. There is no gender-neutral name for individuals in the armed forces. It's an airman, whether you're male or female. And the same with the Coast Guard. It includes the Coast Guard Reserve and Coast Guardsmen. And so now we're going to break it down a little bit further. Military, as the population that I serve, usually when it comes between military and veteran, military is either someone in the Guard, in the reserves, or active duty. And a veteran is someone who has served and gotten out. Now, active duty is that it's your job 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and yes, it can be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Guard and reserve, usually we think of the individual who is 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year, but we know that that is no longer the case anymore. Their training is longer, they may be deployed. And a veteran, of course, is someone who has served and gotten out. Now, the National Guard and Reserve, that breaks it down even further. When you think about the Guard, every state in the country has a Guard unit. And their boss is the governor of that state, whereas the reserves think more federal, so their boss is the president, right? And so that's how that follows right there. I don't know if you can hear it, but I have a slight accent. That's because I'm not originally from Minnesota, if you haven't figured that out by now. I'm from Alabama, so if my accent gets a little thick and a little weird, I apologize. Now, this is not a history lesson for you necessarily, but it's a kind of an idea of the conflicts that have happened since 9/11. And the reason I show this is a lot of the student veterans that we serve may have been involved in one of these conflicts. And we just need to know and understand historically where people are coming from and what they have experienced. And of course, acronyms. Everybody and everything has an acronym. And of course, the military has got all kinds of acronyms. But these are important to us because it kind of gives us an idea of who and what we're dealing with. ETS, expiration term of service, that's the day you get out of the military. Advanced Individual Training, AIT, that is the training you get after basic training. Now, not to confuse you any further, but if you are in the Army or the Air Force, you go through basic training. But if you're in the Navy or Marines, you go through boot camp. Not to confuse you, but let's be specific. So if they were ever to mention basic or boot, that's what they mean. MOS, that military occupational specialty, that's the job you had when you were in the military. DoD, Department of Defense, Joint Services Transcript, that's all of what you have been involved with while you were in the military. So it's important to us here at the University of St. Thomas because that's the credits that they bring to them. Excuse me. That was twice and a little rude. I apologize. The weather has changed in Minnesota, if you haven't heard. So I'm trying to deal with a cold as well. I apologize. But then you have the acronyms USA, USN, Air Force, and these are just the 5 branches of service. Let's talk a little bit about military culture. So there's a strong sense of team in the military. We've all gone to school and we've done those group projects, and there's always one person who doesn't quite do their part, and we all have to take up for themselves. And so that may irritate someone who has been in the service a little bit more than most people, because we have to understand, in the military, when we talk about team, it literally can be a life or death situation. And failure is not acceptable. I knew of someone, it used to be, and it may still be, that in the state of Iowa, for example, if you joined the National Guard would pay all your tuition and fees to go to school. That's fantastic. That's an incentive for you to join. And I knew of someone who joined, and that's the reason that they joined the Guard, and it was fantastic. Great, no judgment, whatever you want to do is fine. But right before school started, they had their PT test, their push-ups, sit-ups, and run. She failed the PT test by 1 push-up. 1 push-up. She did not get her tuition and fees paid for. They had to scramble. Her parents had to pay out of pocket to get her through that semester. And that's the military culture. Structure statement, very strict chain of command. There's always some level up, right? And, excuse me, very rude there, thank you. Very specific structure statement. Strict chain of command. You never go above the person next to you. You always go next one up. The reason that's important for us is to understand is because a student may see their professor as higher up the chain of command. So if they're halfway through a semester and they're failing out, they may never go to that professor and ask for help. So that's why it's always important. We encourage professors at the beginning, go, hey, if you have an issue, come see me. The VA is so adamant about this and knows that education is so important that they actually have a sentence on their website where you can copy and paste that basically says, if you have an issue, please come see me at the beginning of the semester. Expectations to be tough at the same time. The culture includes peacefulness, restraint, and obedience. Now, military experience also, separation from family or loved ones. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. My first place to be stationed was Heidelberg, Germany. I spent the first week learning language, culture, what to say, what not to say, how to exist in that world. Left home for the first time. Separation from extended family and friends, relocating from family and friends. And you have to get used to a different part of the world, different culture, different climate. And there's some stressors that are involved in the military service while they're in. Military comes first. They once told me, if I wanted you to have a family, I would have issued it to you. And that's a true thing. Physical fitness is mandatory. You have to be physically fit. We just talked about that student who didn't get her tuition and fees because she didn't quite make it. Constant job training. Mass punishment for negative conduct of one service member. I don't know if you ever watched Full Metal Jacket, but if you remember Pyle when he was standing on the footlocker eating the donut and everybody else was doing push-ups. It happened while I was in basic training as well. I have no idea how this happened. Someone got a pizza and ate a pizza during basic training. Well, needless to say, all of us were woken up at 2:30 in the morning to do push-ups until 4:30 when we had to wake up. So yes, it does happen, and they were not the most popular person at that time. You have a before and after deployment. And Navy members can do a 6-month rotation, 9-month rotation at a time. And there'll be absences and deployments while in school. They can last from 6 to 18 months, these deployments. Multiple deployments. There are several people. I've worked with students who've done 3 deployments, 5 deployments, and they're gone so long. And then you have the emotional cycle of deployment. You have the pre-deployment, deployment, and post-deployment. Training, long hours away, getting ready to go. Spending more time in the field to get ready. Getting your affairs in order. 19-year-old men and women preparing a will at 19 years old. I don't know if that's really something you should think about when you're 19 years old, but that's what's happening. And if you're in the National Guard or Reserve, you have added stress, especially if you're in school. And I've seen it. Last year, there was flooding in Iowa, and I had a student when I worked in Iowa. She was called up on a Thursday. Said, you got to come down and help us. Left. Just left completely. Went and filled up sandbags. But fortunately, we had professors that understood, and she came back, and it was like nothing was ever missed. And that's what we really, really appreciate with our professors and our faculty and staff and administration, is they understand the commitment and they're willing to support them, and that's what's really, really important. I'm really thankful for that. There's an emotional cycle while you're also during the deployment. You're adjusting to being in a combat zone or on a ship or aircraft. You're adjusting to new climate. I had a student, he was stationed in Washington State, which is usually kind of rainy, and next thing you know, he's in Afghanistan, which is probably not like Washington, lots of desert, lots of heat, but that's what happens. Dealing with emotions regarding separation from family, friends, partners, and maintain some level of emotional control. Can I deal with it? Persistent hypervigilance and arousal, constantly trying to figure out what's around you. There's a lot of sleep deprivation, fatigue. I had a student, he once stayed up for 96 hours straight. 96 hours. And believe me, not a lot of stuff was probably happening during the whole 96, but he had to be awake and aware and constantly finding out what's going on. And you have periods of intense boredom. And many have experienced firefights, and their buddies wounded or killed. We get a lot of things we hear, IED as an acronym, improvised explosive devices. Now the honeymoon stage is great. It's wonderful. We've seen it when they've come home, flags along the road. It's fantastic. And that lasts a little while. The longest my wife and I have ever been apart is 3 months. 3 months is the longest we've ever been apart. And when we get together, it's great for 2 days. And that third day, my wife looks at me and goes, I love you, you need to get out. And I have to go somewhere, and the reason is, not because she doesn't like me, because I hope she still does, it's that she has learned to live without me. And that's what happens on deployments, is that the family you leave behind has learned to live without you. And when you come back, having to deal with how do I fit into this society? How do I fit into this world that I've just left and come back to? And so you have these adaptive behaviors while you're over there, more aggressive driving, trying to be more vigilant. But they come back to the States, it becomes road rage, right? And there's a new normal. And of course, you have to deal with the emotions of war, the things that you have seen. I had a student, and he was deployed twice. And that first time he was deployed, he was ready. He was gung-ho. I am ready to do what I need to do, to fight for my country, to serve, whatever it is. And he said, Norman, the second time I was over there, the whole time I'm thinking to myself, don't die, don't die, don't die. And now we need to really talk about what's that transition from the combat to campus. And that's important. That's important for us to know. And please understand that a student veteran, they're diverse. They come from all branches of the military, all 5, range, all ages, races, ethnicities, genders. I have students that are 18, and I have students that just graduated who are 46. They've served during times of war and peace, and they all have different educational goals. People ask me what are the most popular majors for student veterans. Well, it ranges from everything: business, electrical engineering, pre-med, pre-law, history. And they're more likely to have families. And they're probably a little older. They're more like a non-traditional student, probably over 24. They do have families. And they do have other things. They may work in the evening. And that kind of affects the way I program here at St. Thomas. A lot of things I do is during the day while they're here. Not much happens at night. But one thing you need to know about is this ETS, this expiration term of service. That's when they get out, if you remember the acronym. That's when they get out of the service, and everybody kind of knows that ETS date. Mine, of course, was April 15th, 1997. That tells you how old I am. Don't judge the gray in my beard. So, what's an interesting thing when it comes to ETS date is that loss of identity. They are given so much responsibility, and then when they get out, it's not there. So, for example, I had a student, he was 21 years old, and he was in charge of a fire team, which is about 4 people, depending. He was their mother, their father, their sister, their brother, their counselor, their psychologist, their nurse, their babysitter. This is at 21, and he was in charge literally of millions of dollars of equipment. And when he gets out, he may go try to find a job, and they may go, great, thank you so much. We're going to stick you back in the warehouse doing $8.50 an hour. Now, there's nothing wrong with people who do that, but you go from that much responsibility to something that's not quite there. And when you come to class, you may go to a class and go, this is where I came from, this is who I am, and that may be fantastic. Thank you for your service. We're going to put you in this group. You're just a regular student in the back. We don't want to hear from you. I'm not saying professors do that, but that may be something that they feel. And that can really, really be detrimental to them. It's really hard sometimes to translate your military skills and experience. And so that's why we work a lot with our career resources to help trying to figure out what that resume is going to look like. How can I translate a rifleman to management, right? But if you're an NCO rifleman, you're inventory control, management, things of that nature. So there are ways to do it, and we are very fortunate here at St. Thomas to have those resources available to them, but that's what they need. Moving to something unknown, that transition can be very difficult, especially transitioning to school. And how do I adjust from one culture to another? Changes in friends and family, and they stress of not having that military community. Some people will actually rejoin and volunteer to deploy back over there, not because they necessarily enjoy war, but they want to be around people who understand them, who understand what they've gone through and who speak the way they do. And that's why we're really fortunate with our Veterans Resource Center is there's a place for them to collect and can talk to each other. And they know that they're with people who understand them. There are really a lot of misconceptions when it comes to veterans and student veterans. Number one, every veteran has PTSD. Well, we know that's not true. Everyone in the military, not everyone has got PTSD, and not everyone who has PTSD has been in the military. And PTSD causes violence is another misconception. A lot of times, it's exactly the opposite. I don't know many who have gone towards something that's causing them stress. They, a lot of times, will go away from it. And only combat veterans have PTSD. That's not necessarily true. Some people can get actually PTSD just by hearing stories of their buddies. Every veteran who's deployed saw combat, not necessarily. And it's okay to ask, this is a difficult question, and believe it or not, they're still asked. It's okay to ask military members if they've killed anyone or have PTSD. Not at all. Never, ever, ever. I work with them every day. I never ask them that. Never. It's never okay. But we know that, right? But people still ask. There's other difficulties that they may face. Again, we talked about there being an older student. It's really hard sometimes to relate to an 18-year-old classmate who, if you're 24 and you've experienced half the things that they may have experienced. And alienation. They may feel that they can't talk about what they've experienced without being judged. Or people just don't want to hear what they have to say. And things to understand about student veterans in the classroom. Again, difficulty relating to classmates. They find loud noises to be disturbing. What's really good with our resource center is it's located in a different building from our student center. Now that's important because if you've ever been to a student center on any campus during lunch, it gets really loud and really crowded. But they can go get their lunch and then come back over to our Veterans Resource Center where it's a little bit more quiet. And that's important, I think, for them. And they become anxious with changes in the classroom. It could be, the classroom could have rows of chairs in front of it. And then the next day, the professor goes, let's make it a circle. Well, if they do that and a student veteran comes in, they may not go to class. Because there's a change. Why is that important? Because when they're deployed, they're hyper or vigilant, right? And so they have to make sure that everything is okay. And so let's say they're doing patrol every day, everything's the same, and then one time something's different. Well, why is that different? What's wrong with it? And so those changes can really affect them sometimes. Now, these things that we talk about is not true for every student veteran, but true for some. They have excessive absences, and we know that some of them have PTSD. Let's talk about excessive absences for a second. I had a student, and he was in a Spanish class. And one day the professor asked him questions in Spanish, at Spanish class, over and over and over and over again. Well, that immediately took him back to when he was in Afghanistan. What it was is he and his group were in a town, and they went to the town and said, tomorrow we're going to bring you food, 50 pounds of flour and 50 pounds of rice. Great, wonderful. Town had about 80 families, 200 people in it. The next day, 10,000 people showed up. 10,000. And he said, Norman, they just tore through us. They just tore through us. And what were we going to do? I mean, we weren't going to do them any harm. They were hungry. They actually had to call for backup to actually get them extracted out of that position. But what was happening is they were talking in a different language to him. And that's where he was in Spanish class. He missed 3 weeks of school. He couldn't go. He said he was stuck in his driveway one time. He was gripping the steering wheel, turned the car on, and sat there for 2 hours. So I said, okay, let's talk to your professor, right? And his professor had no idea what he was going through. And so we worked with the VA and our counseling department on campus and with disability resources. And number one, the professor did not count his absences against him. And we had documentation for him, and he was able to get out of that class with a C. But that's some of the things that may happen, and that's just the realities. Again, not for everyone, but it was true for this student. And we know that PTSD occurs after an individual has seen something, and that's how they deal with it. And again, it's experienced by some, but not all, student veterans. But there's a repeated reliving of the event. It disturbs their day-to-day activity. And a lot of times they will avoid emotional numbing, whatever that may be, or excessive awareness. I had a student that came into the resource center one day, and he was shaking. Not a tremor, but a violent shake. And I said, what's going on? And he said, we just saw a film in class that had a war. There was war footage in this film, and it took him back to when he was in Afghanistan. And I asked him, did the professor not tell you? And apparently the professor wasn't there in the class before, so didn't have a chance to warn him what was going to happen. He stayed awake for 24 hours. He couldn't go to sleep, couldn't find peace at any point in time. And that's just another thing that may happen. I am a proponent of trigger warnings. Now, I've never, ever, ever asked anyone to change anything or any class for anyone. I just asked, be kind. Let someone know. Sometimes people say things about trigger warnings like it's for snowflakes. Well, the population that I work with, not many snowflakes, if you know what I'm saying. And with student veterans, they may sit in the back of the classroom so they can have a clear view of everything. They know where the doors are. They know where the windows are. They're easily startled by noises. They can be withdrawn from class discussion. And they have a difficulty maintaining that emotional control during some of the topics that they may go through. And remember, they may have stressful or traumatic experiences, but not all develop or experience post-traumatic stress. I've worked with students who are able to compartmentalize. They're able to deal with it. It was a job, and they're able to go on with their lives, and that's fine. That's great. And help us to ease that transition. Have an open dialogue about what's bothering them. Discuss their career goals. Let them know that there are services and resources available to them. And remember that each student is individual, and they're all unique in what they've gone through. Here's some questions to ask. Express appreciation for their service. Now, here's a very sensitive thing that's what's happened, is sometimes we say things like, thank you for your service. Some, not all, sometimes will think that's just a throwaway line, right? Because sometimes we don't know what else to tell them. What else do we say to them? right? It's like if you go up to someone as you pass by them, hey, how you doing? You're not necessarily saying, wanting to know how they're doing, you're saying hello. And so maybe, when you express appreciation for their service, stop. Say thank you so much. And then ask them other things like what branch of service were you in? And how long were you in the military? And what was your job or specialty? And what's important for me is, how's your experience at St. Thomas been? And these questions, not once are we even asking them, do you have PTSD? Have you killed anyone? I don't like that question. I've never liked that question. I don't like saying it now, but it happens. And so I never even asked them if they've been deployed. I just want to know about them. And remember, if they want to talk to you, just listen. Just listen. Just listen. And how they tie in with life at school, and that's how that's one of my things, or the biggest thing that I am concerned with, is they have they have different life experiences. They have difficulty building those relationships with people who probably aren't student veterans. And again, we talked about how they may see faculty as superiors, and they may not want to share because they don't want to be judged. Safety in the classroom. What do? Do you have assigned seating? Can they sit where they need to, either close to a door or where they can see all the doors? Are there rules? Sometimes they have really extreme problems just concentrating in class. And again, can I see the door? Does it face a large building? Can people easily see me, what's going on? And how these continued, how they talk about it at school, there are potential triggers. We talked about the person who saw the war footage. And very crowded areas. We talked about how they can leave the student center to go to the Veterans Center. Certain dates. A lot of times a vet will know a conflict that they were involved with. They may know a date or a time when they lost a buddy. I knew a student who had half a sleeve tattoo, and they were dog tags of all the people that he had lost while he was over there. These are the truths, and these are the things that they live with and they deal with, but they know these things. They're very proud of what they've gone through, and we need to acknowledge that and appreciate that. Certain smells. I had a student, and he was affected by pine trees. Don't know why, he just was. Certain sounds, loud bangs, fireworks, and not the fireworks that we plan to see, going out to see the big display. It's the ones that are set off in the backyard, right, or in the street. And they now have signs that a veteran can post in their yard saying, hey, please don't set off fireworks, I'm a vet. And the way people may be dressed, or even vehicles can, if they look suspicious, may trigger something in them. And here's some things not to ask, and again, we've talked about some things, but again, please, you know this, we all know this, never ask the first question. Second, how terrible that must have been for you. I worked with a veteran, and he said, Norman, I was in class, and this other student, all they knew about me was I was a veteran. That's it. That's all they knew, is that I served in the military. And one day they came over to me and looked me in the face and goes, how do you do it? And he's looking around like, how do I do what? And the student goes, deal with the voices in your head. All she knew is that he was a vet, and that was her one assumption. Go back to one of our first questions. How do we view veterans? That's how she viewed them. Now, I'm going to edit his response, but basically, he said, I tell them to shut up. But that's the reality of some may experience. Oh, you were just support, so you were never in danger. I've never known military people who were not in danger. And so you don't like Arabs or Muslims. That's their allies while they're over there, right? That's who they live with and talk with. So you're a hardcore conservative, right? I've heard it on both sides, and we're talking extreme, all the way left and all the way right. It just happens. It's a political conversation, and sometimes, and a lot of times, student veterans aren't different than anybody else. Everyone has an opinion. Couldn't get into college, huh? There's some really, really smart people here in the military. People join for different reasons. Familial. My parents were in it. My grandparents were in it. I wanted to do it. Pay for college. All kinds of things. And then you survive the military. This must be easy for you. No, not necessarily. I had a student tell me one time, he said, Norman, when it comes right down to it, it's all about survival. It's all about survival. They're a unique population. They've experienced different things. And there are ways that we can support them, deal with them, take care of them if we need to. But that trust is very, very, very important. And just follow up with them. It's about follow-up. And now, if you have any questions, or if you've already sent them while here, please, by all means, I will be more than happy to answer them. And again, I apologize, trying to get over that cold thing. So let's rock and roll. I'm going to drink some water.
All right, Norman, thank you so much. That was excellent. Do you have a few questions rolling in? We'll have
Okay.
15 minutes or so to go through those.
Sure.
First of all, what percentage of St. Thomas students are veterans?
Oh, sure. So right now we have about 200. Okay, so that's about 1 to 2% of the entire student population, which is pretty, I would say, pretty standard across the country. So we are exactly where about the norm is. The norm, not me, but the average, right? So I'd say about 1 to 2%.
Okay, and can you talk a little bit more about what services specifically are available for student veterans and alumni veterans? At
Oh,
St.
absolutely,
Thomas?
absolutely. Thank you. Oh, great, fantastic. So we have a lot of things. We do have the resource center where they can go. So some things we do is once a semester we will bring the VA to campus to help with claims, questions, things like that. Now, what's important with that is a student doesn't have to miss class to talk to the VA. And so we're trying to eliminate some of those things. We're trying to bring those services to them. The insurance questions, we bring the Department of Labor to campus to talk about careers and those resumes. We work with career services to tweak those resumes and even have interview sessions, what to say, what not to say, things like that. Because even if I do tweak that resume to get all the military speak out of it, if I've been in the military, I'm used to speaking that way. So kind of have an idea, be more conscious of what we're doing. We actually have a psychologist on staff now where 50% of her time is completely and totally dedicated to student veterans, and that's fantastic. We have another individual we just hired where he's 50% admissions, 50% academic advising, 100% student veterans. Now, what's great about that is at another college that had a similar position, 92% student retention rate among student veterans. And that's fantastic. When it comes to the alumni, we are crafting our Tommy Veteran Alumni Association Network. And so we'll be reaching out to you in a few weeks, talking about our military ball, which you'll be invited to. We have a reception for homecoming. These are things that we're just starting, and we're really hoping to expand that. And so I've never turned anyone away. I've never turned a veteran away. And so I think any of the services that we offer here on campus would definitely be open to those not on campus, especially the alumni. Going forward, a mentorship program, maybe connecting student veterans to alumni, bridging that gap, helping the next generation. And so just going forward with things like that.
Okay, that's great. And you talked at length about sort of the emotional transition of transitioning from the military to student life. Can you talk a little bit more about more of the logistical side of things? Is there still a GI Bill? What are those more formal paperwork kind of things that students have to go through, or veterans have to go through to become students?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So, one thing we try to do is always address those questions about their GI Bill, about any kind of benefit they may receive at school. So one thing we've just started is a specific, like an individual orientation for future military student. So we try to get them even before they've started school, kind of address those needs. If they have questions, make sure that they're answered the best way they can. We have someone who is, of course, the certifying official. Almost every school has one. We have a really, really tight team, a veterans team. We have someone in financial aid, someone in academic advising, admissions, counseling, the registrar's office. We're all a team, and we're all trying to address those needs immediately the best that we can. We have an emergency fund where, especially at the beginning of a semester, say that housing allowance isn't coming in or they're not able to meet certain needs, we're able to give them a loan. It's not that much, but maybe it can be a little something to help them get through. It's a no interest loan, and there's 4 months to pay it back, so there's no stress. You got to pay it back tomorrow. So we try to help them out that way. There is the GI Bill. You have the post 9/11 GI Bill, and we are a yellow ribbon school, 100% yellow ribbon, and so we are in agreement with the VA that if anybody who is eligible at 100% post 9/11 GI Bill can apply for and hopefully qualify for that yellow ribbon, which means they can attend St. Thomas, tuition and fees free. Plus they get a housing allowance once a month and they get their books, $1,000 a year. And so there are ways there. Our financial aid office is really good with helping those who may not qualify for that particular one, but kind of helping them with scholarships and grants and things like that. So we have people on campus to address those needs, to try to address those needs and go further. And so going forward, looking at other ways we can help in those ways. So hopefully that answered that GI Bill question for you.
Another question here. Do you have any presence on the Minneapolis campus available to graduate students?
Okay, so that's a good question as well. So I started last semester trying to get to the Minneapolis campus at least once a week. I know that because we are based out of the St. Paul campus, we do want to, and we are trying to make sure we have that presence on the Minneapolis campus, whatever that means, whatever that looks like, whatever we need to do. And so in the next few weeks, sending out a survey or sending out a questionnaire going, what is it that you want? What is it that you need? What can we do to address the needs over there? So I think sometimes, especially with the Minneapolis campus, and the graduate students, because everything is over here, they may not feel like they're involved, and that is something we want to make sure that they understand. It's all veterans, no matter what, grad, undergrad, no matter which campus you're on. And so that is a challenge that we do know exists, and that is something that we're not ignoring, but we are trying to address.
Can you expand more on the thank you for your service comment?
I can.
This person says, whenever I see someone with military apparel, pins, experience on a resume, I like to express sincere gratitude for their service. So I'm intrigued in your point, as I do not want it to come off as a meaningless greeting.
Of course. And like I said, it's not everybody. It's just, so like I did the example, and I always put the example on me as I'm from the South, and I ask people, how you doing? And that's my way of saying hi. And sometimes, how are you doing, is when you ask that question, usually it's interpreted of you want to know how they are doing. And so right after 9/11, and we were really, really heavily involved, and it's not that we're not now, but thank you for your service. And I think after 15 years, anything can kind of go stale, to be honest. And it's just making sure that when we do it, and I'm not saying I'm not saying veterans don't believe people when they say it. It's just that sometimes it's just every once in a while we can throw something out. And so I always try to think about, or I'm always adamant, but the fact is, if nothing else, just stop and go, thank you. I'm not saying you weren't or anybody else wasn't. I'm just saying that sometimes some student veterans have expressed that. And so that's just something I was sharing.
All right, thanks for that. Can you share some success stories from either doing this training around campus at other places, or success stories that you've had here at Veteran Services at St. Thomas?
Oh, absolutely. So what's great about this this training is people want to know more and more, right? Once you start, they want to know more of what we're doing, and we're actually going to expand on just this training. I'm working with a psychologist about expanding it to where we address a whole session on PTSD and on TBI, traumatic brain injury, and how that may affect a student. I've worked with a colleague of mine, Rachel, at a different institution, and we did one specifically for academic advisors and how to advise military people. So we're seeing it expand because the need is there. We're being told the need is there. We want to address that. When it comes to the arrangement and where they want to sit, I had an assistant financial director at a different institution come to me voluntarily and say, Norman, I totally rearranged my office so that the chair that a student was sitting in was no longer had their back to the door. So they're volunteering to do these things. We're seeing great changes with that and with this training. And people want to know, and they want to know more and more and more. Some success stories that we've had. Sorry. Well, I told you one about the one student. We were able to help him with his absences, and that was good. We had another student and at an institution, and he had to take extra time for tests. Well, the time that he needed, the Disability Resources Center was going to close. So it was not going to be the time. So he came to me and said, "Can you do something for me?" And so, excuse me. It is not an advertisement for Aquafina. Not that it's bad. It's just not sponsoring this particular episode. So we went to Disability Services. I said, "Well, look, we'll stay late. If he can take it in our resource center, we'll stay late and stay with them and monitor it." And they would go, "Great, perfect." And so it's those things like that. It's those little things, those little victories, those little success stories that make what we're doing tangible, right? We're expanding on what our original purpose was. And so that's what's really good. So.
All right, got time for 2 or 3 more questions here. Next one, what's next for Veterans Resource Center? And for people who are interested, how do I get involved?
Oh, fantastic. So, so 3 big projects we're working on this particular year coming up. One of them is our Alumni Network, making sure we start to substantiate that, make that real, make that existent, making sure that the alumni have that connection not only to St. Thomas, but to the veterans here at St. Thomas and that Veterans Resource Center. What's good is we're having a reception on that Friday of homecoming. I believe that's next week, the 5th, from 5 to 7 here on campus in our Veterans Resource Center for any alumni or anybody. But you may have already graduated and never seen our new resource center. We want you to come by, have some refreshments, talk to us, see what's going on that way. We're also starting a once-a-month military family coffee hour, because a lot of the individuals I meet, they may not be in the military, but they have children or spouses. And so once a month, we're going to meet in the morning, and we've already started this, just to sit, just to talk, just to chat, commiserate, whatever that may mean. Talk about the family members that you're in and the challenges that may be faced. We have our first annual military ball coming up on November 2nd, and hopefully you'll get an invitation to that, and hopefully you'll be able to come. It is a formal, it is black tie, and so we're asking military members to wear their uniform. We're doing a PTSD awareness conference in February, which is going to be open to anyone who wants to attend. We're hoping to have professional development, CEUs, continuing education credits and units for professionals who want to attend. And so as we reach out with our alumni network, and so when we reach out in emails and bringing them back, making sure that they feel, that you feel welcome in our resource center, and establishing maybe a mentorship program or a connection that way as well.
Okay, great. And St. Thomas has a fairly visible ROTC program. It's been around for a long time. Can you talk a little bit more about your relationship with ROTC on campus, how you may be working with that program, partnerships that you may
Sure.
have?
People ask me constantly my relationship with ROTC, or what's the difference, right? And so there's a couple of ways to think about what I do in ROTC. One way to think about it is ROTC is academic affairs, and I'm more student affairs, right? And so ROTC is preparing people to go into the military. I deal with people who are in the military or have already been out. It's not that I will refuse an ROTC cadet, it's just that some of the benefits that I deal with may not apply to them unless they're already in, like, the Guard or Reserve doing a special program like that. I've enjoyed a pretty good relationship with ROTC while I've been here, in that we try to go to each other's events. I know they participate in ours, and so we're looking to expand that. What is that going on? We have known of certain cadets who've just gone up to vets and go, "Hey, what's the military like?" And there has been discussion of maybe like a panel or a mentorship or an unofficial mentorship, or at least just a chance for cadets to come and talk to vets and go, "What's it like? What can I expect when I go in?" And I think we're showing that the military, we are a family, and we are coming together the best that we can. So.
All right, and last question here. How does the Veterans Center at St. Thomas and the work you're doing set itself apart from other universities that may be doing a similar kind of work?
Sure, sure. Well, I encourage you, number one, to go to our Facebook page for the Veterans Resource Center to see the photos of our center. Please come by, not just for the homecoming reception, but anytime. See what we have. I think we have a very, not just a nice space, but a usable space. We have resources in there. We have a computer station, the usual stuff, but the space itself is such a vital thing and an attractive thing that brings people there, and I think that's important. I think the support that we're getting from administration and from faculty and staff for our student veterans is by far the best I have seen in places that I may have been or gone to. Nothing against any of the other places I may have worked. They are fantastic and wonderful. Or places I've visited, they are fantastic and wonderful. But what we're doing and what we're getting from St. Thomas, it is top-down supported, and that's what I think is really, really important and important for the success of what we're doing. And I'm just very grateful and thankful for that.
All right, well, we're thankful for having you here today. This has been excellent, very informative. And thank you again for the work you're doing and for sharing this all with everyone today.
Well, thanks. I appreciate you watching. And if you have any questions, that's my phone number and my email address, by all means. I'm pointing over here because the monitor is over here, but basically it's over there. So yes, thank you.